In this video, we're going to tie a little fly called the Zoo Cougar, developed by Kelly Galloup. First thing we're going to do is start off with some 6/0 olive thread and a 5263 Tiemco hook. Now, the first thing we're going to do is start with some golden olive, or kind of some yellowish Marabou. And we're going to take a clump here. It's about the length of the shank of the hook. We're going to tie that in there right at the back of the hook. And we're going to take our thread and we're just going to spiral it forward, kind of up over that Marabou. This will help us create a nice even underbody for us to wrap our body material on. You can just kind of clean up some of the olive Marabou and we'll wrap through it nice and tight one more time. Now we're going to tie in the body material, which is just going to be some pearl flat diamond braid. Tie that in right along the side of the shank of the hook, and I'll take my thread about 2/3 of the way forward here. And we're just going to build a nice, even, smooth body with that flat diamond braid. And once I get up to about the 2/3 point, I can capture that diamond braid and trim it out of there. Now, the next material is going to be some white calf tail. And we have to be careful not to use too much of this. All this really is going to be a material that's going to prop up our flank feather for the back of our fly. I'm going to pull out all the smaller, shorter fibers. I want this little prop to be about the length of the shank of the hook. And I'm going to trim that calf tail to the length that I want it, and then just tie that in. I'll make it a little bit shorter here. And literally all that's acting as is a prop for our wing. Then we're going to take a Mallard flank feather here. And I want this flank feather to be almost as long as the entire length of the fly here. As far as the tail, I want it to reach back almost all the way to the tail. Then I'm going to center that Mallard feather right on top of the shank of the hook. I want to make sure that it's perfectly center, and I can really bite down on that feather so that it doesn't move on me. Now we're ready to start to work on the head. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with our collar. And for that, I'm going to use a nice generous clump of some golden yellow deer hair. I'm just going to take a nice big clump, trim it away from my patch here, pull out all the under fur. I'm going to drop this into a hair stacker. I'm going to make sure the tips are as even as I can get them. And I can pull it out from the hair stacker. And we can measure out the length of our collar. I want our collar to be about 1/3 of the length of the shank of the hook. So I just roughly measure that out. Trim the deer hair to length, then I'm going to lay it on top of the shank of the hook and just tie that in with a couple nice tight wraps. I can push down on the collar to help it flare. To each side, just like that. Now we're ready for the head. And again, we're going to use the same color deer hair. This time we don't have to stack it. I'm just going to take a nice generous clump from the patch, pull out all that under fur. I'm going to trim the tips of that deer hair off, just kind of exposing the middle portion of the deer hair. I'm just going to take a nice big clump and I'm going to put it kind of around the shank of the hook, do 2 loose wraps of thread, do a third, then just let go and let that deer hair work its way around the shank of the hook. I want to make sure I get nice, even coverage, and I can kind of push all that deer hair back out of the way and draw my thread forward. And you can kind of push it all back. And lay down a couple of wraps right up in front of all of it. Then we're going to take another nice generous clump and basically do the same thing. This time I'm far enough away from my collar that I don't necessarily have to trim the tips of that deer hair out of the way. So I'm going to do a nice loose wrap with my thread, second loose wrap, and a third. And I can let everybody spin. Push all that deer hair back out of the way and work my way to the eye of the hook. Once you get to the eye, you can push it back just a little bit more, so give yourself a little bit of room to work with, and lay down those last couple of wraps, and then we can whip finish. Trim your thread out of there. Now we can trim the underside of the fly first. I'm just going to pull some of that hair, kind of stand it up, and take a razor blade. I'm just going to take it and make one flat cut on the underside of the fly. Just like that. And I can take my razor blade and I'm going to just kind of dome it or curve it. I'm just going to make one curved cut, kind of upward sloping on the head of the fly. I want to be careful not to cut too deep into the collar. And then we can trim it and shape it from there. I'm just going to pull out some of the side fibers, and I'm going to make just an angular cut, swooping back on the head. Do the same thing on each side. what you should end up with is a head that's nice and flat and wide, just like that. And you can continue to kind of shape it the way you want it to look. This is probably the hardest part, shaping the head and the collar. Got to be careful not to over trim. That's something I'm guilty of all the time. It's overcutting. Once you overcut, you can't put it back on. So you have to be really careful that you don't over trim. Something that's very, very easy to do. That is essentially a finished Zoo Cougar.